Good evening and welcome to RASC Toronto Centre Online. I'm Ralph Chou, the President of the Royal Astronomical Society of Canada Toronto Centre, and I'd like to welcome you to our May lecture program online to replace our meetings that generally have been held at the Ontario Science Centre. With the Science Centre closed, we are doing these presentations online, and tonight is a lecture, and we alternate between the lecture meetings and informal recreational astronomy night programs, and I'll talk more about that later on. Without further ado, I'd like to call on our second Vice President, Paul Delaney, to introduce our speaker for the evening. Paul?
Thank you very much, Ralph, and welcome to everybody who is tuning in to the RASC presentation this evening. We've got a terrific presentation set up for you for this evening. It is from my colleague at York University, Dr. Elaina Hyde. She is, in fact, new to York, joined us last year. She's new to Canada, who has just ventured up from down under, so to speak, and she is, in fact, a new member to the RASC, so she's new all round. Her research is in and above the cloud, combines astrophysics, data science, cloud computing, planetary sciences, optical engineering, telescope operations, not to mention telescope observations. Yes, she keeps herself very busy. And I've got to add that she has favorite computing languages, C, Python, R, and all those other letters of the alphabet. It's certainly beyond me, no question in the world. Elaina's research, though, in astronomy focuses on galactic archaeology. And you thought you had to dig around in the ground to do archaeology. Not true, so stay tuned. So galactic archaeology and data science for astrophysics. While gathering data, she has worked with instrumentation and telescopes around the world. This experience, of course, is what has drawn her to York University, and about this time next year, she will become the director of the Alan I. Carswell Observatory. Her key motivations are the promotion of astronomy education, research through public telescope activities, and exploration. As a lecturer, trainer, and consultant, she is constantly innovating, teaching methodologies for interdisciplinary audiences across science as well as for business, students at York, and the public. Tonight's presentation, a little bit of astronomy and a little bit of data science. Over to you, Elaina.
All right, thank you very much, Paul, for the wonderful introduction. I actually feel a little bit cooler just hearing it, so I hope to live up to the kind words. But yes, I'm going to talk a bit about what happens when galactic evolution and data science collide. As Paul mentioned earlier, I do have a very strong affinity for telescopes, in particular the beautiful 1 meter at York Observatory. So I will be talking a little bit about that. I'm sure Paul has already given some of the great details to everyone. But yes, I will start off with a little bit of my favorite sort of telescope update moments. But this talk will cover a bit of galactic evolution, how galaxies evolve, and what happens when you try to mix data science into that process, as it were. And of course, beautiful telescope things sprinkled throughout. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and get started here. I'd just like to take a minute to thank the RASC Toronto Centre for going ahead and inviting me to talk tonight. This is a great opportunity to get out and think about astronomy, even though everything is a bit closed at the moment. And I'll just go ahead and start the way I usually start all of my public talks, is just going ahead and giving a little bit of a statement of acknowledgement of traditional lands. And this is from York University Observatory, because that's where I'm based at the moment. And I just want to take a quick first slide to acknowledge the many Indigenous nations which are had relationships on York University land, and the wonderful variety of different Indigenous nations in this area. So thanks again for having me, and great acknowledgement for, I'd just like to acknowledge all the Indigenous nations from York. So this is the beautiful telescope that is that is on that land, which I'm sure Paul has already mentioned. So I would feel remiss if I did not bring it up as well. It is in fact a wonderful observatory with 2 domes and the beautiful new 1-meter telescope. I'd just like to take a second to plug our website. If you do want to find out more, I'll also put some links at the end of the last slide, just in case you want to get in contact with us. So a little bit about the observatory. It is called the Elaina Carswell Observatory, and this is because of a wonderful donation by our Professor Emeritus Elaina Carswell, who allowed the possibility of the telescope purchase for our 1-meter telescope. And this telescope was very exciting to me personally. Like I said, I just arrived in Canada last year, so I was actually watching from the social media feeds as it was installed inside the observatory while I was still in Australia. So it's very exciting to be here now that it's all up and working and installed. And the observatory was renamed as the Elaina Carswell Observatory at York. So again, assuming you probably have a lot of these details already from Paul, I will go a little bit quicker here. But just as a reminder, we do have a lot of public outreach from this telescope as well. It's not all science. We do public viewings on Monday and Wednesdays, and we're working on moving those to online as well. So watch our social media spaces. Hopefully there will be an announcement about that coming soon. Our York Universe radio show is still on every Monday night. So lots of great things to engage with and lots of wonderful telescopes. This is our sort of top 3 at the moment. And of course, in the bottom corner, shining big and bright, is the 1-meter telescope. And this telescope is quite new, plane wave telescope, dual azimuth focus, so we can do a lot with it. We have at the moment an eyepiece set up, which means that you can actually look through with your eye. So as soon as we can allow public groups to come up, I highly recommend coming and having a look. And I thought it would be fun to see if I can get the telescope to say hello to everyone. So this is our telescope waving hello. Hopefully you can all see. And once we get our public tours up and running again and it's safe for everyone to come and visit, I invite you all to come and have a look and wave hello back if you like. So this is our 1-meter telescope, and just so you know, these are the mirror flaps that are waving at the top. And this is a small GIF from the bottom watching the telescope motion. It doesn't actually move that fast. This is sped up a bit. So great fun. 1-meter telescopes, and of course they allow us to do a lot of different things. There's a bunch of different undergraduate laboratory exercises that I'm going to assume that Paul has probably already mentioned, but a couple I am going to call out because they talk about galaxies and galaxy characteristics, which is what I'm going to lead into shortly here. Our research interests also cover galaxies, and especially coming soon, we have a spectrograph that we're planning on mounting on the 1-meter telescope, which will allow for a lot more detailed measurements of radio velocities and this kinds of things, including my own personal interest, which is galactic archaeology. So I'm going to use this as a little bit of a segue, not just my own evil plans for the 1-meter telescope, but actually what we can do with it, looking at how galaxies are formed, how that ties into different types of research methods, and what it kind of all means in the end. We'll get a little bit theoretical there. So just to make sure everyone's on the same page, what do I mean by galactic archaeology? Well, first we have to take a step back and realize that our own galaxy, the Milky Way, is this large system of stars. And this is an artist's representation. We obviously can't see the Milky Way because our sun is embedded inside of it. But if we could, we think that it might look something like this, a beautiful spiral arm structure. And of course, there's some kind of bright center area. And our sun is, you can probably see on the image, just up slightly off of the center and out in one of the spiral arms. So our sun is embedded in this system. If I turn it sideways, it looks a bit like a fried egg. It's 150,000 to 200,000-ish light years across, somewhere between 100 and 400 billion stars. We know a lot about our galaxy. We know it has spiral arms, halos, but what about other structures, and how was it constructed? How did this galaxy system get put together? And the the root base of galactic archaeology, and what that means is looking inside of galaxies for remnant structures in the same way that you might imagine an archaeologist dusting off sand from some sort of ancient relic. We're sort of trying to dust off the Milky Way from what relics of what used to be there. So what were the objects that formed it? Are there remnants of those still around, and what do those structures look like? So that's leading us into the Milky Way's construction and the galactic archaeology that we use to sort of uncover that construction by peering into different old remnants of stars. And what this might look like, again, this is an artist's representation. If we could look far, far outside of our Milky Way galaxy, we would actually see that it's not just a spiral flat structure. There are other things around in the halo, and the halo is that sort of sphere all around the Milky Way galaxy. So we think this is kind of what some of it looks like. And you'll notice I put some qualifiers on there because this is an artist representation. And the more that we look into the Milky Way's halo and try to peer through the stars that are bright and blue and new, we find that there are more and more old structures kind of hiding in strange places. So if our galaxy was formed by lots of smaller objects, then we can use our galactic archaeology to search through the Milky Way and find those remnants of stars that are still around today. One of those is called the Sagittarius dwarf, and this is one that I'm going to focus on exclusively for this particular illustration because it's one that I've looked a lot at. But if our galaxy was formed from lots of smaller objects, this is the hierarchical scenario: small plus small equals bigger, and over time you build up. If that's true, we should see lots and lots of surviving streams and satellite galaxies. And these streams occur when the smaller galaxies get too close to the gravitational potential and they sort of get pulled apart. And this happens, we think, with all kinds of objects. So we predicted initially, or astronomers predicted initially, that there would be hundreds and hundreds of these, but it took quite a long time before we could actually find them because the stars are very dim and we are inside of the Milky Way. So it makes it very hard to uncover these. And I'm going to come back to that again when I get to data science as a method for uncovering these a little bit more accurately or a little bit more thoroughly. So there's not really a missing satellite problem. It's more like a missing we can't see them problem because we think that there are probably enough of these streams out there to account for this method of evolution, but we still have to find them. So we'll focus in a little bit on the Sagittarius dwarf stream. And if I just pull that one dwarf galaxy, that one little blob of stars, and look at what happened to that object as it came into the gravitational potential of the Milky Way, well, I might get a model like this, which was done by David R. Law. This was a little bit of an older model. There's some newer ones out there doing amazing things with dark matter, so look for those if you like. We won't be able to get there today, unfortunately. So this one object is spread all around the Milky Way, and it covers all sort of the whole sky. And it's not just in the plane, it actually loops completely around. So it probes a large region of the halo of the Milky Way. So it's a really interesting object for lots of different things, looking at dark matter, looking at galaxy formation, looking at galactic archaeology. So I really want to find out exactly what these stars are doing and if they are all where they say they are, or all where the models say they are, and if not, why. So there's a lot of interesting questions we can answer here. And of course, I want to do that with as much data as possible. So I go into the archives, I look at survey data, and of course I also tried to get as many observations as I could back in Australia. So this is a sample image of some observations that I was able to take while in Australia. And you can see that this is an image of the Milky Way that has been projected, so that it covers the whole sky. And the possible member locations are all around the sky, and that's because of the perspective we're viewing in it. It really does look like this. It's just in the sky, it's projected like that. So I tried to get as many of these as I could. Each circle is about 400 observations. But the problem with this is you can see there's this great white blob of stuff in the middle that I don't actually want in my data. That whole Milky Way, the whole system, I don't want that in my data anymore. Every star you can see with your naked eye in the night sky, I don't want to capture. So somehow I have to find smarter and smarter ways of getting these out. So data science to detect structures is one of the reasons why astronomers, and especially optical astronomers, are getting really, really interested in data science. Because how can I get these structures out of very occupied systems like the Milky Way? There are hundreds of thousands, billions of stars. How do I get the data I need out of that? So if I have access to very, very large data sets, I can use certain data science methodologies to actually extract those. And so the critical part with data science is using a trained algorithm that I can extract the stars that I want from. So it's not just enough to have lots of data and be able to use it. I actually have to be able to make sense of it and find the ones I need. So data science and astronomy collide. This is where it gets a little complicated, because you're not just doing astronomy anymore. You actually have to involve a whole set of processes around data science, which is computational, algorithmic, and a lot of people will use different terms for data science. Some mean end-to-end processes, some will just mean machine learning. It's a very new field in a lot of ways, and a lot of things continually change. So just keep in mind that it is, in fact, something that is an ongoing process. So the larger view of you take the larger view of the data, the system and the data you're working with, and we still use the scientific method, but I also try to incorporate the data science method so that I'm learning from the largest set of populations as I can, and trying to make the best generalizations that I can, and find those really interesting stars that I want to find. In this case, are they Sagittarius dwarf stars? Did they used to be Sagittarius dwarf stars and then they got stripped out? Or are they something else? Are they part of the halo? Are they part of the Milky Way spiral? Are they from somewhere else altogether? So there's a lot of possibilities. And the first thing we always do in a data science methodology is you try to graph the best possible statistical selection criteria. And this is what was done here. So I'm not going to go into great detail with that because it's a lot of math, and I don't think that's the most fun part. But if you do this, and you create a statistical selection that you reasonably believe, for every area in the sky you look at, you will find that some stars are very likely members and other stars are not. And so what you do is you group those stars together and try to find out if the stars that are the most likely members have any characteristics that are identifiable. And what happened in the case of the Sagittarius dwarf was we found out that the stars that were still left in the center and the stars that had been pulled off as it went around the Milky Way had certain properties in common. They actually had a common metallicity gradient, for example. And metallicity is a property of stars that determines basically how much not hydrogen they have. So how evolved those stars were, how enriched they got by various generations. So it's great fun, and you can find a lot of cool things out about it. And this is a little bit of data science so far. So initial data science methods were effective in this group. I can find members of the Sagittarius dwarf in the Milky Way, even through the vast number of Milky Way stars that are out there. But how can I use this data science to develop an even more effective manner? And what about machine learning? Can we do this even better? So the answer is usually yes. And in this case, it's definitely yes. So if I want to do this even better, I need to take a little step back and remember to tell everyone, look, I said data science earlier, and we talked about using statistical selections, but maybe it's a good idea to take a step back and just say, what is data science again? So what are you exactly doing? So data science is very much generalization. It's generalization of data that you definitely have, and it's only going to do what the data you have does. So that's my top level explanation. And because it only requires data, you can use it in any field. So you might have heard about Pokemon Go. This is a data science heavy project that became a viral app that unfortunately we cannot use right now. But it was because of their use of data science. They are able to process the enormous amount of data that they get in from however many millions or billions of users they have now. Talking cars. Absolutely an artificial intelligence application. Artificial intelligence is actually data science. So these words that you might hear floating around sometimes are all about the same process of grabbing data, making generalizations from that data, and quote unquote learning as a machine. So I'm going to go ahead and use a Matrix quote. This is usually where I would ask the audience, how many people have seen the first Matrix movie? Usually it's like 80 to 90%. So if you haven't seen the first Matrix movie, there might be a few spoilers. So you should definitely watch the first Matrix movie and then come back. But if you have already seen the first Matrix movie, you know the premise, that there are, in fact, artificial intelligences interacting with humans. And one of them says, never send a human to do a machine's job. And there are certain jobs that are strictly for machines. And this is something that I would refer to as counting tasks, generalization tasks. If I was to ask Paul Delaney if he could please be my new wristwatch and start telling me the time starting now, and he'd have to count every second, 1, 2, 3, if you ask a person to do this, even if they are as cool and amazing as Paul Delaney, then they are going to eventually not be able to be a wristwatch anymore. It's not a human task. It's not something humans are good at. It's very repetitive, and it requires a high degree of accuracy. So a machine's job is anything like that. So that's, anyways, the fastest possible explanation of machine learning. Apologies for my glossing over of a massive amount of things. If you have more questions about machine learning after this, there's a lot of books I can refer you to. So what am I doing with this data? I'm generalizing the data, and my data science scheme for grabbing cool, awesome data points out of the Milky Way and converting them into general points looks a lot like the scientific method. It is, in fact, the scientific method, but with extra generalization in there to account for the fact that it is a pure data-based method. And so you can see that these kind of work very well, which is why data science is kind of going across all the sciences at the moment, because it's a very applicable tool that can be used. So keep in mind that this is just one person's interpretation of data science. As I said before, you will actually hear many, many different interpretations of data science from other people. Everyone from business to finance to chemistry has their own preferred method of doing it. This is just my opinion, man. So a little bit of a caveat, but in general, we're trying to think about how do I generalize members of the Sagittarius dwarf to a very pure form given the data I have. And once I have that, I can give it to a machine to learn from that data. And this is fundamentally different than a human trying to learn, because humans learn from experience. They learn from doing things and making mistakes. And the first talk I ever gave in astronomy was, I will say, not as good as what I'm doing right now, whatever you think about that. So humans learn from experience. In 10, 15 years, I will probably be giving even better talks about astronomy. Machines do not. They, generally speaking, you have to give them parameters to learn within. There are certain algorithms that try to replicate learning from experience. We're not going to talk about those right now. They are still data-based. Now, learning from data is a very different thing. It's a very useful thing, but it requires very good data and very good knowledge of the data you have, which is something that we'll run into quite a lot in astronomy, is that not all surveys are completely uniform. In fact, very, very few surveys are completely uniform and random samples. So it's hard to do. But, we could take into account if we really understand the data. If you don't understand the data, your machine will be as wrong as your data and as wrong as the way you've labeled it. So an example of this that I love to refer to actually comes from a paper that you can all grab. It's on the archive. It's called "Why Should I Trust You?" about classifiers. And I think I have time for just a quick little aside here. So I'm going to tell you a tiny story about dogs and then galaxies. So if I wanted to tell the difference between pictures of dogs, I might have all different kinds of dogs in a database as pictures. I might have, Chihuahua dogs and husky dogs and maybe wolves and foxes, and any kind of dog-like creature can go into this database, and they'll all have labels on them. So somebody did this. They made this dog-wolf creature database, and, bulldogs, other kinds of dogs. They're all in there. They all have labels, and they ran their data through quote unquote machine learning processes, which are just data generalization, which use the images to predict what labels ought to go on that data. So if I give it now a bunch of random pictures, it can tell me exactly what dog is in that data. So it came out with amazing test results, and they had 99.99% super great accuracy. They could always, get greatest test results. But despite the fact that all their tests were perfect, and the statistics were perfect, every single husky dog was classified as a wolf. Obviously, this is not true. A husky dog is not a wolf. But every single picture they did of a husky dog was a husky dog in snow. Every single picture they did of a wolf was a wolf in snow. And you give a database a whole bunch of images and say, this is a wolf, this is a wolf, this is a husky dog, this is a husky dog. It's going to pick out what it thinks the defining feature of that image is. So some of you might see where this is going. I hope a couple. But in every case, the common thing that the algorithm picked was snow, because every single image had snow, whether it was a husky dog or a wolf. So it attached the label wolf to everything, and it worked perfectly. This is a perfect working machine learning algorithm. And this is a data problem. And this, when we go to galaxies, is something that we really have to think about. If I now give my machine learning algorithm a giant stack of galaxies, and the background of those galaxies is used in the interpolation, I might just be selecting the background. I might not be getting spiral galaxies. Maybe I've got an elliptical galaxy that for some reason the background was the same and it selected that. So the image on the other side is Galaxy Zoo, which has done an absolutely fabulous A1 machine learning job. I am super envious of them. We don't have time to talk about them in great detail, but they have nailed this problem. So good on them. Now, we have talked a little bit about how machines don't think like humans, and that you should not send a human to do a machine's job, but you should also not send a machine to do a human's job. And this is my personal take on it. You can quote me on this. Please do not send a machine to do a human's job. It will end badly, because the human's job in our last example was to make sure that the data was not biased. And this is something that comes into play a lot in astronomy and other areas as well. The machine's job is to sort it. So one great example of this kind of decision making in data science and machine learning is something called a decision tree. Now, a decision tree sorts things into multiple categories. And the best way I can illustrate this is actually by playing a game with everyone. So what is a game that we can play with multiple categories that would illustrate machine learning? This isn't a riddle. We're actually going to play it. So let me just go ahead and click OK. And what this game is this is a game of 20 questions. If you've never played 20 questions before, what it is the person states a question to an audience of people, and those people can ask any true or false question to try to address the issue. So my question to everyone watching and everyone on Twitter or Facebook or anything, YouTube, is, whatever platforms you're on, what is my favorite solar system object? So how are you going to address this? Well, please ask your true or false questions on Rask Toronto YouTube. That's www.youtube.com Rask Toronto Live, which is on this slide. I have also retweeted it on my Twitter account at Hyde, so you can also ask me there if you like. But basically, you ask the true or false questions. If I answer true or false to your question, then you should be able to guess what is my favorite solar system object. Now, keep in mind that I have pitched this for an astronomical audience, so I have chosen something that I think you can guess, and hopefully we get some good questions. So the idea again is you ask a true or false question, and I will say true or false, and we'll see if anyone can guess what is my favorite solar system object. Now, you win if you can do this with 20 questions or less. And that is how you win 20 questions. So I have retweeted it, and I believe on Rask Toronto Live, there's the comment area, so that is being monitored at the moment. And we're going to go ahead and see if we can get some true or false questions that I can answer. And this will sort in the same way that a decision tree sorts the problem. And eventually you will, I think, find the answer. Do we have our first question?
First question is, does it have rings?
Does it have rings? No. So that's a true or false, and I can say no. True, false, or yes, no are both binary, so those will both work. So no, it does not have rings.
This is my question. It's Blake. Is it a terrestrial world?
Is it a terrestrial world? No.
This is Paul. Is it a Kuiper Belt object?
Is it a Kuiper Belt object? No.
One from YouTube. Is it blue?
Is it blue? No. Although, as a bonus, I will say its color is not well pinned down. That's a freebie. Not part of the game.
From YouTube again. Does it have a moon that we know of?
Ooh, I think you just managed to throw an error into our algorithm. So I can't answer yes or no. So you officially asked a question that is unanswerable.
All again. I'm assuming I'm allowed 2 questions. Is it self-luminous?
No. No, it is not self-luminous.
Another question from YouTube. Does it have visible storms?
Does it have visible storms? No.
Question again from YouTube. Is it a comet?
Good question. No, it is not a comet. That's a good guess. So far, a lot of very good guesses. I think I've asked the right audience.
Another one, is it a planet?
Is it a planet? We'll go no, but your machine took an extra long time to respond. It did fall into the no bin.
One more time for me. Is it in the main asteroid belt?
Yes. I'm putting a wide variable around your definition of main. So I'll go with yes, it is in the asteroid belt. Getting awfully warm here.
One from YouTube. Is it Planet X?
Is it Planet X? No, although that would be cool. I'm sorry, I'm not that cool. I didn't put it as Planet X. It is. I have written it down for prior for posterity, so I'm not cheating.
I could enjoy this game. Is it a dwarf planet?
I think you just broke your machine again. So I don't think I can answer that.
Another one is it an Earth probe?
Is it a what?
An Earth probe.
Is it an Earth probe? Oh, that's a good question. No, it is not an Earth probe. That's a very good question. That eliminates a lot of things. That's why it's a good question. Very good. We're getting awfully close. Are there any other guesses we should entertain?
Another guess as is it a moon?
Is it a moon? No, it is not a moon.
Was it delisted as a planet?
Was it delisted as a planet? No, it was not delisted as a planet.
Is it recognized by the International Astronomy Union?
As an object? I'm going to assume that that's as an object, but it is recognized.
Has it been visited by a terrestrial spacecraft?
Seeing how close it got. No. It has not been visited.
How many questions have we had so far?
You're getting awfully close to 20. Let's do one more, and we'll see if anyone can get it, and if not, I will give the answer. So we'll do a little recap. So the first couple questions were, does it have rings? No, so it's no rings. It's not a world of any kind. It's not a planet. It's not in the Kuiper belt. It's not blue. There's no visible storms. It's not a comet. It is in the asteroid belt. And there were a few others that I forgot to write down. So that's our recap.
One last question from YouTube. Is it a reflection of another object?
Is it a reflection of another object? No. It's its own object. So I think we've gotten awfully close with the asteroid belt, and I'll just go ahead and use this opportunity to say thank you to the people who are putting the questions into YouTube comments. They're very good. So a few of them were excellent at narrowing down large swaths of the solar system, which is exactly what you want in this kind of elimination process. So you get separation, right? So every time it splits, you get a new idea what category it might fall into. So it is in fact an asteroid belt object, which is called Pallas. And this was for Pallas Athena, which is an alternate name for the goddess Athena. So this is the second largest object in the asteroid belt. And it was thought to be a protoplanet, but it's under debate. So from 2009, they were still debating on whether or not it is a protoplanet. It does have, a little bit of interesting situation because it's in a very inclined orbit. So it goes in and out of the top and bottom of the asteroid belt, which means that it actually has high chances of running into things. And we think that it's one of the sort of worst drivers in the solar system, hits a lot of stuff, looks a bit like a giant beat up golf ball. So this was my object. And of course, the object of the game is not necessarily to win, just to see how many questions and how close you can get it. So everyone did very well by narrowing it to the asteroid belt. But you'll note that we were not, despite our digital connections, we weren't particularly fast at this task. And this is because this is a perfect example of a machine task. Humans play these as games like 20 questions, which is what we just did. We could have also tried telephone, where, if we get enough people in a line, eventually your message is distorted. But humans don't replicate things perfectly easily. Machines do. And so this same algorithm, if you program it correctly to deal with solar system data, will be more effective at grouping and selecting. So if I say to, I actually have a version of this that is Star Trek trivia, which I don't know if anyone else has one, but it's a little tiny spaceship where you can think of a thing from Star Trek and it will 20 questions you. It uses the machine learning algorithm and the decisions tree to actually narrow in on what you have selected in this exact same way. And it's very, very fast. It doesn't hesitate, and it can almost always guess what thing you're thinking of within 20 questions. So this is a perfect example of machine learning being great for computers and maybe, a fun hobby for humans, but not something that we should necessarily do ourselves in science. So the moral of the story is that we're bad at this, but we are, but that actually, this is a perfect task for my machine to do. This is a great example of, what I can give my machine and have it classify things much, much easier. So of course, I'm looking very much forward to doing more of this with the 1 meter at York Observatory. And once we grab data from our telescope at York, we are going to be able to use these same types of logic and selection techniques to figure out what it might match from larger data sets, which is really, really fun. So it means that even with you know, a 1 meter on-campus telescope, you could, in theory, find out if that star is really a member of a Sagittarius dwarf, or if it has come into the Milky Way Galaxy from somewhere else, or if, you know, that comet is actually from another solar system, which happened not too long ago. We had a few extra solar system visitors zip by. How do they find out whether or not they're members? Very, very quickly. Well, this is one way. So you make smarter machine decisions for your machines. So looking forward to doing a lot more upcoming discoveries with you know, big data and telescopes. Of course, you know, having arrived up at York not too long ago, of course, I'm really thinking about that one. But any telescope you like, of course. Faster computing and larger data sets will help. And I didn't really mention cloud computing, but if you are migrating onto very, very large data sets to compare your data to, it makes a lot of sense to do it in a distributed fashion. So just keep that in mind, that if you do download some of the really big survey data, your machines will not be able to handle it locally. So cloud computing and beyond, you know, looking forward to that a little bit. And I'll kind of try to wrap up here and just say, you know, what I really take away from this, and what I hope that you all take away from it too, is not just that it's a great deal of fun and a lot of fun games, but really we have this amazing new capacity and ability now to bring in data and information from so many sources that I like to say, you know, the sky really no longer is the limit, because we can expand and parallelize so much farther. So I have just a last little thank you slide for letting me come on tonight and regale you with all of my favorite things. I even got a little Star Trek analogy in there, so I'm quite happy. And if anyone is interested to check out more, please feel free to come by York Observatory website. And I've got our York Twitter accounts up there as well, and you already have mine. So thank you very much, and I'll go ahead and end up here.
Thank you very much, Elaina. My gosh, you know, when you think about the amount of data that is available to us as astronomers, both amateur and professional astronomers today compared to even 10 years ago, let alone 20, 30 years ago, it's amazing. And to be able to access that data is one thing, but to be able to utilize it, as you have explained to us tonight through the marvels of data science, just opens up whole new worlds, whole new vistas of information that we can hopefully use to better understand the universe. Having said that, there must be lots of questions out there, so I'm going to hand it over to, and I'm not sure whether or not it's Ward or Blake, who's going to be feeding you questions from YouTube. Okay. So, Blake, over to you.
All right, thanks. I'm just checking our YouTube feed to see if there are some questions. I have one for you. I see that a lot of researchers are using machine learning, but at the same time are also recognizing that there are limitations of that, and then deploy projects in things that, like you referenced, Galaxy Zoo. Have you made use of that resource for some of your work in the past, or are you planning to in the future?
Yeah, so you mean making use of the Galaxy Zoo framework?
Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, on Galaxy Zoo even, you can see that they have some expanded sites as well, where they've pulled in other data to try the same methods with. And the advantage there is that they have put a huge amount of effort into their approach, and they have an extremely robust and highly enviable approach where they've set up multiple ways and systems to work together. And that's, I think, something to keep in mind, is if I write a program to solve a task, or a single machine learning algorithm, it's as effective as it can be. It has its own error bars, it has its own methods. But if you do something like an ensemble approach, that means you can take multiple different algorithms and solve the same problem with all of those different algorithms to come up with a more accurate solution in more dimensions. And what Galaxy Zoo has done is they've incorporated this idea with human input. And so if you go onto Galaxy Zoo and you register with them, you become one of their machines, literally. So your neural network, as it were, so I can program a neural network. I also have one. My neural network is X good at identifying galaxy types, and I can go through and click it, and I'm a user with a specific tag, and I have a certain set of ratings that I've done. I can become more trusted over time as my ratings are verified, and machines can be rated the same way. It's actually really interesting because it allows you to verify when a human stops doing their ratings well. That will appear because you've also let other humans rate and you've also let other machines rate. So the same object will say, hey, look, actually everyone's holding steady except for this user has started to deviate in their rating, so their trust will go down. And so you end up with this beautiful sort of evolving, shifting rating system that's quite complex, and it would take more than me to reproduce something like that. So would I consider using their system? Absolutely. I would not want to try to build it from scratch. It's really grown. I have some ideas for similar systems that would be a little simpler and more contained, that I think would be very fun to run on multi-dimensional spectroscopic data. But yeah, I suppose to answer your question, there's a lot of approaches out there. Whichever one you pick, keep in mind that you don't want it to become a black box science. So if I was to use Galaxy Zoo, you'd want to make sure you're understanding what those algorithms are doing with your data, and how that's being unpacked. In the same way that I'd want to understand, chi-squared if I was to run that statistically. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. I gather that my impression is that for researchers, it's even just a lot of work to set the project up in something like Galaxy Zoo, and that's good on one hand. It helps you really clarify what your objectives are and what the parameters are, and to explain it clearly to someone doing citizen science that they know what they're supposed to do. Like really, it's the stuff that I've done with Galaxy Zoo. It like you say, I'm just being a robot. I'm answering a true or false question. It's really simple.
Yeah, exactly. And that's it is a bit of a trade-off, because the thing you really have to watch out for is, you download somebody's super cool Galaxy classification code X532A, and you run your data through it and you get your results, and you cannot explain those results, because that has, I'm making it a fake example here, but it's a bad look. Because you might be running anything, right? You don't know what they've done, what kind of criteria they've set, if they have some weird parameter calls or something, because a lot of this code can get very, very complex, and you want to avoid sort of false precision, and there's all kinds of pitfalls. Like I said earlier, you don't want to be classifying all of your husky dogs as wolves, which can easily happen.
Okay, very good. Earlier in the session, when you talked about that the 1 meter telescope would be getting a spectrograph, Eric and I started talking about that, and we were wondering what type it was and if it's going to have nasty chemicals associated with it and so on.
Oh my gosh, I would love to tell you all about it. Unfortunately, I don't have it yet. So I will be talking with your your Vice President Paul Delaney later about this. But as you may know, we're still waiting to get back into our offices at York. But this is on my short list of things to unpack and play with.
We have a question from Louis. There's a few parts to it, so give me a second here. He asked, what computing systems do you use? Is it a network of computers or a standalone system like D-Wave? Or do you use cloud systems?
Yeah, so I run two systems. One is my local machine. I run that for smaller tasks. It's an old, pre-modern era, I suppose, MacBook Pro, but it runs all of the scripts I have that I need from Python, C, Fortran, IRAF. So everything reasonably small. So I'd say less than 100,000 stars, right? But on larger distributed scales to actually do proper machine learning training, I tend to use cloud systems. So I was using Google Cloud previously, so I've had some experience with their databases. I've also used SQL databases locally, but it depends on the scale of the problem you need. Sometimes you need the massive distributed computing, sometimes you don't. I try to recommend free things whenever I can. Unfortunately, not that I know of, there's no real free cloud computing resources available. So I mostly go off of smaller tools now, and then I run batch jobs on the cloud when I need them.
And it sounds like you're writing your own code for a lot of this.
Oh, yeah. So the codes that you run on, for example, Google Cloud, I'm actually quite familiar with because I am a Google Cloud sort of engineer, and I used to do training for them. But it's you write it in Python, so you can run your same Python scripts, and you can run PyTorch, or you can run your basically equivalent of Jupyter Notebook. So there's something called Colab, which is free, which I do recommend if you're trying to get started with distributed computing, and that is one of the nicer free tools that they have. And it's so that part of it will work natively across different codes that you run. If it's a really esoteric language, you'll probably have to run it locally and then convert whatever you need into Python before running it. But I don't know if this person knows a lot about cloud computing, but there are things called virtual machines, which you can spin up and install any operating system on. So if I needed to run Fortran 77, I would spin up a virtual computer on the cloud and run it there.
I used to write Fortran 77. Holy cow.
It's, you know what though, some of those scripts are just really hard to translate, so I still have a couple myself. Nothing against Fortran.
Yeah. Do you take advantage of donated time from Watson?
No, I haven't used Watson.
So I'm just checking. I think that's all the questions I see so far in the YouTube. Hopefully I haven't missed any. So Paul, back to you.
Working on it. Getting that unmuting of the microphone, sometimes a bit of a challenge there. Okay, thank you very much indeed, Elaina. As I said, the age of astronomy is now sort of merging, blurring. I'm not quite sure what the best verb is there, with computing and the ability to collect volumes of data and then to be able to utilize all of that for the benefit of uncovering those nuances, as you said, the archaeology of formation reflection, in this case, of our galaxy. I think we're going to see more and more of that, especially as the systems gain in complexity. So I think it's an exciting era for both astronomers and computer scientists. So thank you very much indeed for tonight. We're going to transition over towards our sort of information session from our president, Ralph Chou, talking about the various activities the RESC either is or is not getting up to in this pandemic lockdown. But before we actually get there, we're just going to take a couple of minutes hiatus. So don't go away, but we're going to be replaced with a little bit of music. And then shortly, we will be back with our summary from President Ralph Chou. So stand by, folks. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, I'd like to also thank Elaina for her very fascinating presentation tonight. Looking back at 50 years of activity in the RESC and listening to various talks in those years, we've come a long way, particularly in the use of computing to analyze data. And boy, what an exciting time we have now with all of this distributed computing and all of that. So we're looking forward to hearing more about your work, Elaina. Thank you very much indeed. We've got about half an hour before the beginning of twilight, and I'd just like to remind everybody that there's a couple of things up in the sky that are worth looking at, especially since we have a clear sky tonight. There's a new supernova in M61. Today on the RASC list, there was a photograph shown of the supernova taken with the RESC's remote telescope in California. If you're not on the RASC list, you probably should try and get onto it and have a look at that image. It's quite exciting to see that that particular resource is available to our members. The other thing is that there's another comet Swan that is gracing our skies, and it's just become visible brightness. So again, it's another object that you can have a look at. Again, there's been some discussion on the RASC list about whether this object has now reached its peak brightness or whether we might expect it to get brighter in the next few days. So have a look and see what you find out about that. Okay, let's go and take a look at the announcements now and see what's going on in the next little while. So our next meeting online will be on May 27th, 2 weeks from tonight. And here's the program. We'll start off that evening with Dennis Gray presenting The Sky This Month. Blake is going to be talking about how to share observations and photos. And Ron McNaughton will be talking about the dance of Venus, the Moon, and the Sun. So that's 2 weeks tonight on RASC Toronto Centre online. Tonight's lecture is the last one of the current series of lecture meetings that we're offering. Our next lecture will not happen until September, but we do have a talk lined up, and our speaker is going to be Alyssa Albertus, who is a PhD candidate at the Department of Astronomy and Astrophysics at the University of Toronto. And her topic is going to be exoplanets. We don't have an exact title for it, but she did mention that it will be something on exoplanets, which is a subject of great interest to Alyssa. So we'll look forward to hearing about that on our meeting of September 30th. Now, that may be an online meeting or it may be face-to-face. We just simply don't know yet at this time. The Science Center is still closed, but if it does reopen, we will be resuming our activities there. So stay tuned for that. There's a lot of stuff in flux right now. As many of you are aware, the state of emergency in Ontario has been renewed by the House until early June at the earliest. And as a result, all of our educational and public outreach activities have been suspended. So we have down tools for all of our public education programs until the state of emergency has lifted. I can tell you that Council and the Education Committee have been talking about how we can resume activities once the state of emergency has been lifted. There's a lot of things that we need to think about in terms of physical distancing and the problem of how do you actually show people things in a telescope eyepiece, especially when we're trying to avoid problems of contagion and transmissibility of the coronavirus. And so we are looking at new and innovative ways to do our EPO activities, but we haven't got anything settled quite yet. But this is something that we are working on. The other thing is that all of our observing events similarly have to be put off until we figure out how to share views. And again, OAC and the observatory committees are working on this kind of thing as well to try and come up with new and innovative ways that will allow us to continue our programming. So stay tuned for that. But all of that is on hold for the moment. Just today, I confirmed that our summertime program, where we've been doing presentations on board the Chichimon ferry that runs between Manitoulin Island and Tobermory, have been put off for this year. The ferry is only doing essential services now, and they expect that that will be carried on through the summer. So we will not be doing any programs there, but they're hoping that we'll be able to resume that program next year. And again, we'll see how things work out. But a lot of our classically operated programs have to have a rethink. And perhaps it means that we'll have to think also about our center's strategic plan as well, which has been central to a lot of the activities that we've been following for the last few years. So again, stay tuned for that kind of thing. In the meantime, we do have our next RASC Toronto Centre online program, but also remember that there are things going on elsewhere. We have our programs at the David Dunlap Observatory, And while the observatory is shut down by the city of Richmond Hill, we do have speakers who had been lined up for the astronomy nights at the DDO, and we've already had one presentation online. We are going to have another one in that series of talks, and the next one will be on May 23rd at 7:30 p.m. on this channel, right here on YouTube. And that'll be a talk presented by Mohammed Shaban of the Dunlap Institute, and he will be talking about weighing the universe with a balloon-borne telescope. And so, again, you can get your astronomy lectures online, this time through our activities at the David Dunlap Observatory. In addition, remember that the Society has its own YouTube channel, and among other things, there is a national online speaker series, and there are talks that are regularly scheduled on that channel so that you can go and take a look at some of those talks that are being offered by the Society. Just recently, I received a message from the Society that they are asking every one of the centers in the Society to provide a speaker for the online speaker series. And so Toronto Centre has an opportunity to offer up a contribution to this program with one of our speakers. And Council is going to be looking at that and responding to the Society's national office very, very shortly. For new members, remember that the First Light program, which is our three-meeting series of orientation talks, has been suspended until the Science Center reopens. And the leaders of that program, Charmaine and Kirsty, will be getting in touch with you once the Science Center reopens to let you know when the series will be resuming. And again, we'll just have to wait until we hear from the Science Center about reopening. Similarly to EPO and observing programs, the Carr Astronomical Observatory is closed until the state of emergency ends. And when things do resume at the CAO, we are going to have arrangement in place to ensure the safety of users of the facility. And the CAO committee is busy trying to work out how to ensure safe operations to reduce the chances of transmission of the virus if something untoward occurs on site. So again, watch for an announcement once we've figured out how we're going to deal with this, and we'll just see how things go. So that's it for now. Again, we've come to the end of the announcements. Thank you for participating in tonight's program, and we will see you again in a couple of weeks for our next RASC Toronto Centre Online. Good night, everybody. Clear skies.